Word of God that engages us in meditation, the words of God, 2 of them, just these. Yes, Lord. And they come actually out of the mouth of what Matthew calls a Canaanite woman. Mark calls her Syrophoenician. She is from the regions outside of Israel at that time. So she is a Gentile. She's got a lot of strikes against her. I'll get into that in a moment. But I want to open just by saying a couple of words here about this kind of a text. This is another one of those stories where Jesus is hard to figure out. You don't expect Jesus to call someone a dog, but how else are you supposed to read this story? She comes to Jesus begging, and Jesus, first he ignores her. And after she begs some more and apparently bothers his disciples in the process, he tells what I guess amounts to a parable. There's a man, and he's feeding his children, and he gives the food to his children, not to the dogs. It's clear who he intends is the dog in that story. So what do we do when Jesus says things that maybe make us uncomfortable? Maybe it's just a little bit complicated, maybe shocking even to hear Jesus say these things. And I'll start out simply by saying this. It isn't the purpose of the text, it's not the proper use of the text to extract it outside of the book of Matthew and to treat it in an isolated way. We do that when we preach, we do that when we teach. We take a text and we treat it in an isolated way. We try and take it apart and put it back together in a way that makes sense to us. But in reality, this is a story that is part of a greater narrative. And if you go ahead and read the rest of the chapter, and the chapter before it and the chapter after it, for that matter, read the whole Bible, you'll see that very, very clearly, Jesus is not merely interested in Israelites. I'll give you an example just from the texts, just limiting the scope of our reading, the texts that were chosen for today. Go to your psalm. You all are familiar, of course you are, because at the end of every worship service you hear it, the benediction. This is from the book of Numbers chapter 6. And in Numbers chapter 6, God says to Aaron, the high priest, I want you to say the following words to the Israelites. And when you say these words, in the saying of these words, I, God, will put my name on my people. And that's when he gives Aaron the words, may the Lord bless you and keep you, may the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. That's at least the way they translate into English. Well, those exact same words show up here in Psalm 67 with a twist. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine upon us, that your way be known on earth, your saving power among just the Israelites. It's there. It's throughout Scripture that God's salvation is not intended narrowly for Israel. However, the Messiah is prophesied to come from Israel. In other words, it is necessary that Jesus be Israel's Messiah in order for him to be the Messiah for the whole world. If he's not Israel's Messiah, he's not the world's Messiah. He's something false. So he has to come and be the Messiah to Israel in order that he can become the Messiah for the whole world. And so that's a little bit what's behind this, though I do still want to unpack the insult, the apparent insult that Jesus speaks to the Syrophoenician woman. But do you see it there in Psalm 67? And again, it really doesn't take too much time. You can just open up your scripture, and probably on every single page, you'll find some indication that the promise and the seed and the message is all sent through Israel. It's a specific individual. It's going to be Jesus. And he is going to be a Jew, and he is going to die at the hands of Jews, and he is going to, through that redemption that he offers to Israel, he offers it to the whole world. Just like Psalm 67 unpacks that that blessing from Numbers chapter 6. Well, so there you have it. And as I said, in the texts that come before this and the ones that come after that, he's already kind of unpacking the idea that it's not who you are or what you do that makes you acceptable to God. It's who God is and what he does that makes you acceptable to God. That's the message of the gospel, and that's the message that ultimately he's teaching in this little story. So that's what's happening. He's kind of wandering through these regions outside of Israel, and he's escaping, and it seems he's kind of getting away from the crowds. More than that, it looks like he's also trying to withdraw from some of the pressure that is being applied to him politically. People want to kill him, and so for his own reasons, he's taken his road show outside of Israel. And so this person comes up, and she is the most unlikely person. Actually, she's got 3 strikes against her. The first strike against her is she's annoying. Not for nothing, but that is clearly the way the text reads. She's not only annoying, apparently, to Jesus, who's annoyed enough to ignore her, but now she's even annoying his disciples. Now, just before this had happened, Jesus' disciples begged Jesus to dismiss the crowd of 5,000 plus individuals prior to feeding them. Prior to feeding them, the disciples asked Jesus to send them away. But that's not what they do in this text. If they were saying to Jesus, "Can you get rid of her, please?" then his response to them makes no sense. Because his response to them is, I have only been sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, what does that have to do if the disciples are thinking, send her away without helping her? So now the disciples perhaps think they've figured it out. Okay, well, maybe Jesus is going to help her, and if he helps her soon, we'll be rid of her even sooner. So the way the story reads, it seems to me that the disciples have come to Jesus, again, with their own idea. Help this woman out so she leaves us alone. That's the only way to interpret their request to him to send her away. It's the only way to interpret it in a way that makes any sense of his response. Because what he says in response is, I haven't come for Syrophoenicians. I've come as Israel's Messiah. I've come as the promised seed. I've come to redeem my people. And so, so that's where the disciples are at in all of this. And they're completely annoyed. Now, why is she so annoying? She's in great need. That's what makes people annoying. People become annoying because they're needy. Well, anyway, that's her first strike. She's annoying. Her second strike against her is she's a woman. Now, notice I'm separating those into 2 categories, annoying and woman. I don't intend to, we're not going to put those together in a single category. This is 2 completely different things. The reason it's a strike against her that she's a woman is because women have absolutely no cultural rights whatsoever. Look, not just in first century, Canaan. In any culture, at any time, until Christianity comes along and says, no, both man and woman are made in the image of God. Christianity introduced that into the world. And until it does, every woman in every culture has essentially no place to make any claims at all in that culture. And so this was the same at this time. And so she's got that kind of as a strike against her. And then the third strike she has against her, of course, is that she's a Gentile. She's not one of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. She's a Canaanite, a Syrophoenician. In other words, she's an enemy to God, culturally speaking. These were Israel's enemies. These were the people they fought against. These were the people that they tried to eliminate from the land of Canaan. These were the opponents of God from the cultural perspective of a first century Jew. Now, why are those 3 strikes against her so important? It's because any one of those 3 things would have barred her from access to God. A beggar was not permitted into the temple. There was a place designated for needy people. Beggars over there, near the temple, but not in it. Women were barred from the temple. There was a courtyard just for the women, but it was outside the temple, not in it. And as you can well imagine, Canaanites were not permitted in the temple. They were unclean. They were considered to be absolutely foreign to anything going on inside the temple. So, yeah, she had 3 strikes way against her. This would be the moment that I would suggest that we pause and consider our own strikes against us. Maybe we don't conceive often enough how annoying we are to God. If you want a doorway into how annoying you might be, consider how needy you are. Now, it's often easy to get kind of distracted away from this very important principle because, we spend all of our time and energy and effort and desire in forming ourselves into self-sufficient creatures. We develop our skills such that we can make an income, such that we can support ourselves, and we don't have to beg. We gather, we accumulate, we save, we negotiate, we, compare interest rates. We look for ways to make ourselves be less needy. And that's the way we look to each other. But in some respects, I have to say this entire episode is a riff on what Jesus says in the wilderness when his fast, and Matthew tells us he's fasting, his fast is interrupted by temptation, and he quotes Deuteronomy, and he says, "Man does not live by food alone." Yes, food, yet man lives. Life is actually sustained by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. That's how needy you are. Your life is only sustained by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. And all your efforts, honorable as they are, necessary as they are, all of your efforts to live by bread, again, are necessary and honorable and needy, but they are not what sustains you in life. The word of the Lord, which endures forever, is in fact what sustains your life. Maybe it doesn't seem like it because you can't see it, but that's what's actually happening. And so this woman, just like you and just like me, we are what maybe Martin Luther's greatest contribution to the theological understanding of the Bible was maybe his pinnacle moment was at his deathbed. Anyone know the last words of Martin Luther? We're all beggars. I can't think of a better biblical commentary than that. One sentence, the whole Bible. We're all beggars. Okay, so we've got that strike against us for sure. It's unavoidable. We can't sustain ourselves from the words that proceed out of our own mouths. We're sustained by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. Secondly, we're all women. Speaking metaphorically here, culturally, we have no right. We have no claim. We don't come into this church because we're members of a country club and we show up on Sunday mornings to get our benefits. That's not what this is. You know how the Levitical code and all the rituals for cleanliness that God had given the Israelites back in the day, they were all designed to remind Israelites of something very important. And that is that when they enter into the presence of God, they are entering into a kind of holiness, a perfect, an exacting holiness that is so other that it's actually dangerous. And the whole business about washing your hands in the right way and abstaining from certain kinds of behaviors for a certain amount of days and not touching certain kinds of things and not eating certain kinds of foods, the whole idea wasn't to make yourself clean in order to enter the assembly. The whole idea of all of those rituals was to remind yourself that when you enter into the holy presence of God, it's a miracle. And so all those rituals were designed really to meditate not on how clean you're making yourself, but what a miracle it is that God opens his access to you to begin with. That's what they were for. So, again, this is another strike that we have against us as well. We don't deserve what we come here for. We don't deserve his forgiveness. We don't deserve the sacrament that he offers us. We don't deserve the fellowship that he creates in this environment. We don't deserve it. And so in that sense, we have the exact same strike against us. Furthermore, we have the third strike against us as well. And if you haven't meditated on this before, meditate on it now. We are enemies to God. It's not pleasant to think about, but it's the truth. And I'll offer it to you this way. I believe that the best way to understand that first sin in the Garden of Eden, when God has he's given Adam and Eve a Bible so small it would fit on a fortune cookie. It's like, eat whatever you want except for that. The end. Right? That's the whole Bible for Adam and Eve. And they start to think, well, I don't know about that. I think the best way to understand their sin is as a declaration of war against their king. God is no longer their king. They are usurping the throne by saying, I think maybe we can find a different way to do things. Yes, they had help. They had a tempter. But they are held responsible for that. And so it's a declaration of war. And so I want you to also understand that in every way that you oppose the work and will of God in your life, you're declaring war against him. You're like a Canaanite in the assembly of Israel. You don't belong. You're not just an outcast. You're an enemy to God. So this is who approaches Jesus in this story. And she's got no right to do it. And yet she does it anyway. Because the thing that is just deepest in her heart, it says that she had, let's see, how does ESV do this? I should know. Yeah, it says that she had, it just says daughter. Some texts will say she has a little daughter. What actually the word little in the text means is she had a precious daughter. The word doesn't actually mean small, it means precious. She had a precious, her ladies, you know what a mother's love is like when something's wrong with one of your children. It's almost as if you love them more at that moment. At least, I'm speaking as a father. I have that experience for sure. And this is what she's got. The most precious thing to her, her daughter, is at risk. She's losing it. She's losing her daughter. And so she is compelled to come to Jesus. And when she comes to Jesus, again, because Jesus is a teacher, and because you have to read the whole text and not just merely isolate the one verse where Jesus ignores her and say, oh, well, Jesus is not such a great guy. Wait till you see what he's up to. He ignores her. He's trying to teach his disciples something about what it means to fall into the mercy, into the hands, into the love of God. And so he doesn't have to respond to her, actually. Culturally, he probably should ignore her. So he's sort of obeying the cultural mores of the time, and he ignores her. But she persists, and she persists not only with Jesus, she persists also with the disciples. She really makes a pest of herself, and the disciples come and essentially ask Jesus to do something for her so that she'll go away. And that's when he says it. I've come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It's his way of saying, I'm your Messiah, not hers. It's his way of affirming she doesn't deserve it. He's teaching his disciples she doesn't deserve it. They need to understand that point, and you need to understand that point. She doesn't deserve it. Help me, she says. He says, why should I give to the dogs the bread that's meant for the children? That's when the insult comes. And it's at this moment, see, when this woman this is the crux moment, because there's a couple of things she could do. First thing she could do is argue on her behalf. Wait a second, Lord. I don't think you quite understand the size of my need, Lord. Wait a second, Lord. Did you just insult me? Who do you think you are? You think you're better than I am? Wait a second, Lord. Do you even care? There's 100 ways that she could have responded to Jesus' affirmation that she doesn't deserve it. There's 100 ways that she could have argued with him that she does, that he's wrong and she's right. And she doesn't do any of that. She actually agrees with him. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. I'm a dog. I'm just a dog. I don't deserve it. There's a second thing she could have done. She could have agreed with him entirely. Yes, Lord, you're right. I don't deserve it. And she could have turned around and walked away. But she doesn't. She agrees with him. Yes, Lord, I'm just a dog. Yes, Lord, I don't deserve it. Yes, Lord, you came for Israel. I'm the thing. Yes, Lord, I'm a woman. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, I have all these strikes against me. I agree with you. However, I believe that at your table, there is so much bread that I'll be satisfied with the mere crumbs that fall from it. And it's at that Jesus says, disciples, that's what I call faith. Great faith, he calls it. Why? Because in that moment, she has communicated the gospel more clearly than the disciples ever have up until now. She has understood that in order for the gospel to be delivered to her, two things she must consent to. Two things. Number one, and get ready, because you're going to consent to this too, because God has sent his word into your heart, just like he has into hers. How else does a Syrophoenician woman know that Jesus is the son of David? What a strange thing for her to say. Son of David, where did she get that idea? Oh, maybe she's alive by the word of the Lord that has proceeded from his mouth. So she's got the word. So she consents to these two things. Number one, here's the first side of the gospel. It is that you are more sinful, more guilty, more depraved, more outside of God's kingdom than you would ever dare to believe about yourself. It is a necessary thing to understand in order to grasp the gospel, that you are more sinful than you dare imagine about yourself. And she also gets the second thing, and that is you are more loved, more forgiven, and a recipient of more mercy than you could even dream to be possible. See, she doesn't argue with him on point one. She doesn't say, Lord, I'm not that bad. I'm not so bad that you should ignore me. I'm not so bad. I mean, I'm a Syrophoenician. I didn't ask to be born in Sidon. I'm not as bad as you think. Dog, come on, Lord. Please, just see me as one of your children. She could have argued with him on point one. She could have argued that she's not actually a bigger sinner than she dare to believe about herself. No, she agrees, yes, Lord. And she doesn't argue with him on the second point either. She presses it. Yes, Lord, also, by your mercy, I am a greater recipient of your abundance than I could even possibly dream to be true. Because at the table of the Lord is such bread, so much bread, that the children can't even grasp it all. It'll fall on the floor, and trust me, that'll be plenty enough for me, Lord. Plenty of mercy for me down here underneath the table. Do you grasp those two concepts? If you do, you've got the gospel. If you're still arguing with God on either one or the other, then I beg you to just associate yourself with the character in this story. Because the extent to which you argue with Jesus about either one of those points is the extent to which you are rejecting the gospel. You guys remember the movie Sabrina, Harrison Ford movie, Sabrina? It's a story of a very wealthy man, bachelor, played by Harrison Ford, and I don't remember who the young woman is that plays opposite him, but she's a servant girl. She's poor. She's nothing to him except that they fall in love. And through the course of the movie, of course, he thinks because he's wealthy, he can have whatever he wants, including this little servant girl. And she kind of senses that there's something not quite right about that nature of that relationship. And so by the end of the movie, she's sort of run away, and she doesn't tell Harrison Ford where she goes. And Harrison Ford, though, has really, truly fallen in love with her. And so he goes to see her father, and he begs her father, where did she go? Where is she? Where is she? And the father looks at Harrison Ford and says, you don't even deserve her. And Harrison Ford's character says, I know, but I need her. And of course, the father reveals to her location to him. Because if Harrison Ford in that moment had said, when the father had said to him, you don't deserve her, if Harrison Ford had said, what do you mean I don't deserve her? I'm the best thing that's ever happened to her. I can provide for her for the rest of her life. I am exactly what she needs. You know what the father in that movie would have done? Get lost, because you don't deserve her. And as soon as, in other words, I'll word it to you in this kind of way, and this will wrap it up. And this is the theme of the story that we read this morning. If you come to worship this morning, to claim the gifts of God that you deserve, you don't deserve them. And as soon as you realize you don't deserve them, they're yours. Amen.